Luton Town just had one of the most unlikely promotion campaigns ever. They were in non-league just 10 years ago, and they're the first club to get promoted from non-league to the Premier League. And 10 years is a pretty short amount of time. One of the players in their non-league team, Pele Mpanzu, is still in the squad now. And to make things crazier, this wasn't just an injection of cash. They only spent $2 million this past transfer window, and they have one of the lowest wages and squad values in the entire championship. It's a crazy story that they were able to get promoted. But now, pride's going to get even crazier. They have to survive in the Premier League. So my question is, how do they do that? That's a good question, but before that, I have another one I want to ask. Do Luton want to stay up? I mean, it might sound a little weird, but when you look at their signings, Chidozie Ogben, Mads Andersen, and Tahith Chung, none of them really scream Premier League quality. Now, they aren't bad players at all, but the level of the Premier League is so high, and I don't see any of them really being able to contribute to them staying up. But they are all relatively young players who look like they could have a lot of success in the championship. Personally, I think they're preparing to get relegated. I think Luton is already preparing for next season's championship. And it might seem a bit disrespectful to their current players, but I think that makes sense. Not many players in their squad are really Premier League quality, and the few that were last season were only loanees who they have to spend money to get back. The amount of money that they'd have to spend on the squad could be daunting, and that's already on top of what they'd have to spend on the stadium. So maybe the best idea for them is to invest in championship level players to firmly establish themselves as a championship team to maybe challenge for promotion in the future. And for a team that suffered a collapse to non-league in recent memory, it seems like a sound strategy. But that's boring. This is one of the coolest promotions ever, and I want Luton to stay in the Premier League. So first, let's talk about what budget they could have. Now, Luton are very small spenders. I think the best thing we can do is compare them to other small spenders' first seasons in the Premier League. Brentford, in the summer of 21, spent $35 million on players. I'm going to keep that $35 million mark and say that market inflation covers the money for the players that they already spent on. Next, we have to look at Luton's formation and system. They played a 3-5-2 last season, with width coming from the wingbacks and two strikers up top. Now, two of their signings have been wingers, which they didn't play with last season, so that might signal a change to the formation. But given the low budget that we already have, I think keeping the players in the system in a formation that they've already succeeded in is probably our best strategy. So for this team, last season in the championship, they had below 50% possession, so in the Premier League, to say they'd be on the back foot is an understatement. For this team, out of possession work is going to be just as important, probably more important than in possession work. So for example, with the midfield, it might be similar to Liverpool a few years ago, where out of possession work and the energy that the midfield provided was more important than the technique they had on the ball. The defense is also going to have to be really strong, and the strikers are going to have to take their chances. So before we get into the signings, I think we should quickly go over to the players who I think are already good enough for the Premier League and don't need to be replaced. And when I say quickly, I mean it. There's not too many. But first, we have captain and Luton Town's Player of the Year, Tom Lookyer. The Wales international is very good defensively, good enough already for the Premier League in that department. So why wasn't he in the Premier League already? Well, he's not the greatest on the ball. So this is Luton Town. That's not that big of a deal for us, and his defensive ability alone is good enough for him to stay in the team. Carlton Morris, Luton Town's top scorer, I also feel confident in the Premier League. He had 20 goals last season, third highest in the championship, and he also had the fourth highest XG, so it wasn't just a fluke scoring that many goals. And he also offers a good bit off the ball and is very good in the air. And he's a strong striker for Luton that doesn't need to be replaced. It should be said, however, that this was his first really good season ever as a player, and this is going to be his first time in the Premier League, and there have been a lot of strikers who have really struggled to adapt in that move from the Championship to the Premier League. But I think that I'm willing to take the risk and have Morris stay in the team. Left wingback Alfie Doughty is another player I feel comfortable with. He was solid defensively for his position and carried the ball forward very well. He also looks physically ready for the Premier League, and he's a player I'm not concerned about for Luton. And those three are it. Those three are the only players who I feel confident in adjusting to the Premier League well. Yeah, that's not great, and I think we're going to need a couple more to stay in. So what about players who I think have a decent chance at adapting to the Premier League if things go right? Elijah Adebayo was Carlton Morris's partner up top, but he only scored 7 goals and only had 3 assists last season. Though it should be said that the season before that he had 16 goals in a pretty impressive campaign. Something interesting though is in both of those seasons his XG was about the same at 12. So maybe you could say he's due for some more goals, or maybe you could say he's unreliable. Though it should be said that Adebayo is 6'4", very skilled on the ball for his size, and offers a lot of that off-ball work that Luton Town needs. Something interesting last season is that goals weren't a huge factor in the relegation race. Leicester and Leeds both got relegated with 51 and 48 goals, while clubs like Everton, Bournemouth, Wolves, Forest, and Chelsea were able to stay up with 40 goals or less. Dwight McNeil, Everton's top scorer, only had 7 goals. Wolves' joint top scorers only had 6. So I'm thinking that Carlton Morris and Elijah Adebayo aren't exactly the priorities to replace. Then Jordan Clark in the midfield is a player I feel pretty good about, certainly the midfielder I feel the most confident in. From the midfielders, he led the team in key passes and progressive passing, and he did offer the defensive work that the rest of the midfield had. Though I will say that I don't think there's much of a difference between him and Mponso and Campbell, but I think Clark is the most ready for the Premier League. So with that, we have positions that we want to sign. We have needs at goalkeeper, center back, right wing back, the 6, and the 8. So a lot of work to do. So I think the first thing we should look at is the Loanees from last season and whether or not they should return. First, in goal is Ethan Horvath. And listen, I love Ethan Horvath. He had a couple of great moments for the US, but he wasn't a particularly great championship goalkeeper last season. When you look at the teams that got relegated from the Premier League in Leeds, Southampton, Leicester, goalkeeper was a huge issue for all of them, and having a good goalkeeper could be the thing that keeps Luton up, and that just isn't Horvath. Next, there's Marvelous Nakamba. He was very good for Luton Town last season and made that 6th position his own towards the end of the year. I think he was a big part of Luton getting promoted, and I think Luton Town definitely won him back. And to make things better, Aston Villa want to sell him. He doesn't appear to be in Unai Emery's plans, and I think a move is very likely. Transfermarkt lists his value as $4 million, and while those usually end up underestimating the amount, I think with both the player and the club wanting the departure, I think that $4 million is a pretty realistic amount for Luton to spend for Marvelous Nakamba. Now the main issue appears to be his wages, which seem like they're very high. With Luton Town already having a very small wage bill and the small fee, I think it should be able to be accommodated. Next, there's Cody Drameh, who, like Nakamba, was very good for Luton in their promotion campaign, but unlike Nakamba, doesn't have much Premier League experience to fall back on. He'd be a bit more of a risky signing, and he does come with a pretty large fee. Burnley have attempted to sign him as well, and they've already had a bid rejected, meaning that the fee could be pretty high. And for an unproven player, I'm not sure I want to take that risk. Luton have been linked with a right back with a good amount of Premier League experience, a ton of Premier League experience actually. Ashley Young. Young is 38 now, but he was able to play consistently over 90 minutes for Aston Villa last season, and he looked pretty good while doing it. And Everton and other Premier League clubs are very interested in signing Young on a free, so other teams do feel like he still has value to bring. And I think he fits Luton's system very well. Pace isn't a crucial part for Luton Town's right back. James Bree wasn't the fastest player when he was very good for Luton, so I think Young slots in very well there, and the experience that he brings to the team could be crucial. I think he just makes a ton of sense. He's a Premier League level player, he's proven that over the years, and signing a guy on a free would be huge for Luton Town. Now I still want to have some extra cover because he is very old now, and I think he does need that cover, but we will get to that, and I think there is cover available. Continuing with the new signings, I think center back is a real priority for Luton Town. Having a strong defense can keep you in the Premier League, and having a weak defense is what led Leeds and Leicester to getting relegated. Bringing in a top-class player in this position could be a huge help for Luton, who aside from look here, don't really have much quality in that position. I think Bell and Osho might be able to do a job in spots, but they're not somebody who I really want to rely on, so I'm going to be bringing in some center backs. And I think there's a really good player to bring in, an experienced Premier League option who's a great defender who come at a relatively cheap fee. Jamaal Lascelles. Lascelles makes sense for a lot of reasons. He's in his last year of his contract at Newcastle, meaning his fee would be reduced a good amount, and he's not in Eddie Howe's plans, meaning that they would be more likely to sell him. And I should mention he's not in Eddie Howe's plans because of his on-ball ability, not his defending. And as I said before, on-ball ability is less important with Luton, and defending is our main priority. I think he'd fit great into the system. The one concern that I would have is his lack of pace. The outside center backs in this system, Osho and Bell, do have a lot of pace, and Lascelles really doesn't. So maybe you'd have to move Lockyer to an outside center back spot. But I think with Lascelles' defending, that's a trade that I would make if you have to do it, and I'm not sure how much of a concern it would be, considering Luton's probably going to be playing with a lower line, and pace is going to be less important this season, but it's something I want to mention. But I think overall, Lascelles would be a great signing for Luton. I think it would come at around $10 million, given he's in the last year of his contract, and I think it's something that could really help Luton stay up this season. I want to bring in another center back, but spending more money in this position doesn't seem like a great idea, so I'm going to use one of the two loan signings to add extra depth in this spot. And one signing that makes a lot of sense for me is Sepp Berg from Liverpool. Now, he's coming off of a pretty mixed season at Schalke. He was good when he was on the field, but he was dealing with a lot of injuries throughout the season. But he is coming off of a pretty good loan spell in the Championship with Preston, and he's somebody who I feel like might be able to make the jump to the Premier League. Now, I'm not positive about this, and I think that there's a decent chance he ends up sitting behind Bell and Osho, but a good thing about Berg is, despite his size at 6'4", he did a decent job covering at right wingback for Preston in a similar back five system to what Luton Town is playing with right now. So I think with the added versatility that he brings, and the potential quality that he could have at that center back role, Berg would be a pretty solid loan signing for Luton this year. The next signing I want to make is goalkeeper. I mentioned before how goalkeeper was a huge issue for the teams that got relegated last season, and I think having a proven Premier League goalkeeper would be huge for Luton Town. And a name that keeps jumping out to me is Sam Johnstone. Johnstone is a very good goalkeeper for Crystal Palace, but he's not actually a surefire starter due to the presence of Vicente Guaita. But when he was on the field last year, he was very good, one of the better goalkeepers in the Premier League in my opinion. And in addition, he has a reported release clause of $10 million. And if that's true, Luton Town should jump on this opportunity. Johnstone was very good in the Premier League, and getting consistent playing time should make him even better. And it's something that he should desire, given that he was in the England team this past window, and he might be able to stay in that England squad should Ramsdale, Pickford, or Pope pick up an injury or lose form. So I think if that reported release clause is true, for $10 million, I would definitely sign Sam Johnstone. If not, there are some other signings in the Championship I'd look for, Agnes Gunn being one of the top ones. But I think given that release clause is true, I would make signing Sam Johnstone a priority. Then we have the midfield, a position that I feel like needs to be improved upon. But as I mentioned before, I don't think midfield is the most important position in Luton Town's system. And because of that, it's a spot where I want to take a few risks in. With my other signings, aside from Berg, Nakamba, Lascelles, Johnstone, they're all pretty safe signings in my opinion. Guys who I feel like I know what they bring in the Premier League and could raise Luton Town's level. But with the small budget and the quality of the squad Luton has, I feel like they need to take a couple of risks if they want to stay in the Premier League. And midfield is a spot where I feel pretty good about taking the risk. I think if needed to, Clark could play in the Premier League, maybe Ruddock and Campbell could contribute as well, and because of that, I feel comfortable taking a shot at a player a bit more out of left field. And the name that I keep coming back to is Jens Cajuste, a midfielder who's a Swedish international from Marine in Ligue 1. Cajuste was a part of Will Still's overachieving team, and I feel like he provides everything that Luton Town needs in a midfielder. He's got a ton of athleticism, he's 6'2", dominant athlete with good speed and strength. I think he's able to adjust to the Premier League very easily. In addition, he does offer improved ability in ball progression, tackling, and aerial ability compared to the current midfield. I think that he's a player who makes a good amount of sense to sign. I think he fits the system well, and while he's not a proven name, he's not even coming off of a particularly great season in France. I think that they do need to take a couple of risks if Luton Town wants to stay up. Now, this is a signing that I think would cost around $10 million, which is the rest of our transfer budget. But again, it's a risk. I think this is a player who could really burst onto the scene this season, and somebody who could be crucial for Luton Town staying up. So I'm making Jens Cajuste my last transfer that I'm bringing into Luton Town. But there is still one loan spot left available, and I'm going to be taking another risk in the midfield. I feel like it could really help Luton Town stay up. And this is a signing, or I should say re-signing, that you might know the name. Charlie Patino, a prospect from Arsenal who has a ton of potential. Patino was originally from Luton Town before he made his move to Arsenal, and he is a highly regarded prospect. His skill on the ball is immense. He's been compared to Jack Wilshere prior to his injuries, and I think he's a player who has a ton of potential for the future. And in addition to his skill on the ball, in his loan at Blackpool last season, his defending was surprisingly good. And watching film of him, he passes the eye test in terms of his athleticism. I think that he could fit Luton Town's system, having their midfielders be more energetic, and if they're able to unleash his on-ball ability, it could be huge. Patino does want to leave Arsenal this summer, though he does want to leave permanently, so this might have to be a loan with an option to buy, which would be expensive, but if Luton Town are able to stay up, then they'd certainly be able to pay that fee, and I think Patino would be a huge part of them staying up, so they'd want to pay that fee. You'd probably be able to get a big move on him anyway. So I think Patino would be a huge move for Luton. It'd be a bit of a risk, like I said, but unlike Cajuste, this is a loan signing, so should it not work out, you could terminate it in January. Again, this is a more risky decision, but I think Luton Town needs to take some risks in order to stay up. And I think Charlie Patino could be a huge signing for Luton and could be one of the big reasons why they stay up if they're able to bring him in. In recap, the signings that I'd make for Luton Town to help them survive this Premier League season are Sam Johnstone, Jamaal Lascelles, and Cajuste, all for $10 million for a total of $30 million, plus Marvelous Nakamba for $4 million, for a total of $34 million within our $35 million budget. Now, there could be a little bit of leeway in how much is spent total. I think the $35 million is a bit more of a soft cap, but I think it's within the budget that Luton Town would be willing to spend, so I'm fine with those signings. Then Ashley Young comes in on a free, and the loan signings of Charlie Patino and Sepp Berg. Going over the starting lineup, if everything goes right for Luton, you have Sam Johnstone in goal, have a back line of Jamaal Lascelles, Tom Lockyer, and Sepp Berg, possibly Bell or Osho in place of him, but if everything goes right, Berg could be very good for Luton. At wingback, you have Ashley Young and Alfie Doughty. Then in the midfield, you have Marvelous Nakamba, Charlie Patino, and Cajuste, and up top, Carlton Morris and Elijah Adebayo. Then for depth, goalkeeper depth isn't the greatest with James Shea and Matt Macy, but I think if the goalkeeper gets injured, Luton Town are in trouble no matter what. At center back, a bit better. Bell, somebody I feel pretty good about. He was actually very good in Luton Town's ball progression last season. I'm hoping that Berg is able to replace that, but Bell might just have to start with his ability there. Osho is also strong as well in that spot. And then you have Dan Potts and Mads Anderson also available at center back. At left wing back, you have Bell who can cover there, Potts who can cover there, and Fred Adeyemi, who could be a good position player to help cover in that left wing back spot, and Young can transition over to the other side pretty comfortably as well. At right wing back, I think Ben might be somebody who covers in right wing back, despite him signing as more of an offensive player. I think if they're sticking him in this system, he fits in pretty well at right wing back and could transition to that position well. And Berg can also cover in that right wing back spot. At defensive midfield, Cajuste and Patino could also play in that defensive midfield role. The 8 is actually very good with the 3 midfielders who started last season or were in rotation at starting. Jordan Clark, who might be able to start or probably will start if one of those risky signings doesn't work out. Then Ruddock and Campbell as well. And up top, you have some cover in Woodrow, and I think that Chung might have been signed to play striker if they stick him in the same formation. It's a bit tough to say, but sometimes one of the strikers for Luton Town would go play a bit deeper and a bit of a 10. With his lack of defensive ability, that makes the most sense for me. Maybe it's a sign that they're going to be switching formations, but I'm not really sure what Chung does, and Ben is another guy who can play up top. So will this team be able to stay up? Well, they've got a better chance than what Luton currently have. It was always going to be a tough task, but I feel like I had a good amount of experience with this team and a couple of young, exciting players. I think there are a lot of things that are going to have to go right, particularly up top. We're going to need Morris and Adebayo to score a good amount of goals, and I'm not sure how likely that is. I'd err on the side of it being unlikely, if anything. But there are so many holes in the squad that I think I need to take a risk on the strike force being able to keep their form. And I think Morris could be able to score a good amount of goals. Adebayo is certainly skilled, and their off-ball work has been crucial to Luton Town. And as I said before, goals weren't that big of a deal for teams that stayed up, so it's a risk that I'm taking. Then the midfield, if everything works out, I've seen worse midfield stay in the Premier League before. If some of the young signs are able to be good, then it could certainly help out, but again, it's a pretty big risk. I do feel pretty good about the defense, though. Watching Doughty, I felt like he was a very good player. Lockyer's a guy I feel confident in. Ashley Young should be good. Lascelles should be strong. And maybe Berg could really help out, and if he doesn't, he's good cover. And I feel decent about either one of Bell or Osho being able to do well in the Premier League. And I feel confident in Johnstone at goalkeeper.
On the bright side, I think it's a weaker Premier League this season. A couple of really good teams got relegated last year, and all 3 promoted teams stayed up, so hey, 3 shots at second season syndrome. And then they have Burnley and Sheffield United, and they were very good in the Championship, but Sheffield United were pretty bad in their last season in the Premier League, and good attacking Championship teams can sometimes struggle in the transition to the Premier League, so I could see both Sheffield United and Burnley having trouble to go with Bournemouth, Fulham possibly, probably not Fulham, but I don't know, second season syndrome hit some teams pretty hard, and Forest I'm not confident in as well. Then Wolves look like they could struggle, Everton have been in trouble for a while, and honestly, Crystal Palace might be pretty bad if we don't make a couple good signings. So I think there's a little bit of hope. A lot of luck needs to go Luton's way, but hey, it took a lot of luck to get to the Premier League, so I'm willing to bet on it, and I think this is a decent group of players that I put together who could be able to stay up. And yeah, that's all I got to talk about. See ya.